I had just stepped out of my lakeside home that Saturday evening, coffee mug in one hand and the remote gate control in the other, when I noticed a line of luxury cars creeping toward my private entrance. My property sat on the far end of the peninsula, 10 acres of pristine waterfront land I had purchased years ago, long before the HOA even existed. The HOA had been formed later by a group of wealthy transplants who'd built their elite homes around a lake, and while they tried their best to flex authority, my land was never part of their jurisdiction. Still, that never stopped them from trying. Tonight, it seemed, they had sent their queen bee, Karen. There she was, standing in front of the wrought iron gate in a floral dress, oversized sunglasses masking eyes that I could practically feel rolling in entitlement. Beside her, a string of well-dressed strangers were waiting, champagne glasses already in hand, as though my property was the red carpet to their evening gala. I didn't recognize a single one of them. Karen, however, looked like she was about to make herself the star of a show I had no interest in hosting. As soon as I approached, she jabbed a manicured finger toward the keypad box. "Open it," she demanded, her voice pitched somewhere between faux sweetness and outright command. "These are VIPs from the city, our community needs to make a good impression." I blinked at her, then at the people behind her, who were looking around as though they were expecting valet service to appear any second. "Karen," I said slowly, "this is my property. Not the community's, not the HOA's, mine. No one's coming through unless they're invited, and I haven't invited anyone." She scoffed, tilting her head back like I had just insulted her bloodline. "Don't be ridiculous. We all share this lake. We all benefit when important people are welcomed here. Besides, this dock is perfect for networking events, and everyone knows your yard is the only one with the right view." She said it like she was offering me a chance at immortality, like letting her VIPs trample my lawn was some rare honor I should thank her for. I could feel my jaw tightening. This wasn't the first time she had tried to leverage community prestige to get her way. Last month, it was a charity brunch she wanted to host on my deck. Before that, it was urgent storage for her friend's boat. Every time, my answer was the same, no. But Karen had the persistence of a mosquito that knew exactly where your ear was. The air grew tense when I stepped directly in front of the keypad and clicked the remote in my hand, making sure the gate remained locked. "Karen," I said, my voice firm enough to make the group behind her shift uneasily, "you're standing at my private entrance. You don't have permission to be here, and neither do your guests. You've got about 30 seconds to turn them around before I call security, or the sheriff." The mention of law enforcement made her lips twitch, but she didn't back down. Instead, she tried to play to the crowd. "You see, everyone," she said loudly, addressing the VIPs. "This is exactly the kind of unfriendly behavior we're trying to get rid of in this community. Some people think they're above the rest of us. But don't worry, I know how to deal with stubborn neighbors." Her smug little smile told me she thought she had the upper hand, that public pressure might shame me into compliance. Unfortunately for her, I've spent my entire career negotiating with far more intimidating personalities than a suburban social climber with a power complex. If anything, the performance just hardened my resolve. I took a deliberate step closer, dropping my voice to a low, even tone. "Karen, let me make something crystal clear. This dock, my house, the path you're standing on, none of it belongs to you, the HOA, or your little VIP circus back there. You have no authority here. None. And the more you try to pretend you do, the faster this conversation ends with flashing lights and official reports." One of the men in her group muttered something about not needing trouble, and began edging toward his car. Another woman looked embarrassed, sipping her champagne to avoid eye contact. Karen's confident posture faltered just slightly, but she still tried to stand her ground. "You're making a mistake," she hissed, quieter now so her audience wouldn't hear the edge of desperation in her voice. I clicked the gate control again for emphasis, the solid clank of the lock echoing like a final verdict. "No, Karen," I said, turning to walk back toward my house. "The only mistake here is thinking you can walk onto my property and dictate terms. This is over." Behind me, I heard her sputter something about calling the board and reporting me, but by the time she finished, the only thing left between us was the solid steel of the locked gate, and the sound of her so-called VIPs leaving in a trail of expensive engines and bruised egos. The following Monday morning, I was halfway through repairing one of the boat dock planks when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. On the other end was a clipped, officious voice introducing herself as Marcia from the HOA board. Apparently, Karen had wasted no time spinning a tale about how I had verbally assaulted her and denied community members rightful access to shared amenities. I let her finish her speech, then asked one simple question. Marcia, did Karen tell you that my property was deeded separately from the HOA jurisdiction before the HOA even existed? There was a pause on the line, the kind where you can practically hear someone shuffling papers and realizing their argument might have holes in it. She mumbled something about checking the records, and ended the call quickly. I almost laughed. Karen had clearly banked on the HOA backing her up without question, but when you live outside their legal reach, their bark is all they've got. Still, I knew this wouldn't be the end. Karen wasn't the type to accept a defeat quietly. Sure enough, the very next day, I came home to find an envelope taped to my front gate. It was a formal notice of violation, accusing me of obstructing community events and engaging in conduct detrimental to the HOA's mission. I had to read it twice, partly because of the absurdity and partly because I wanted to savor just how far Karen had stretched reality. Not only was it baseless, but it was also completely unenforceable. My property was exempt from HOA rules, something even their lawyer had acknowledged years ago when they first tried to rope me in. I stood there holding the notice, wondering if Karen thought intimidation through official-looking paper would suddenly make me compliant. The funniest part was the required action section. It demanded that I allow access to community-approved guests for future sanctioned events. I could practically see her smirking while typing it up, imagining me bending under her fabricated authority. Instead, I took a photo of the notice, sent it to my attorney, and spent the rest of the evening grilling steaks on my patio as a quiet little celebration of just how little weight her threats carried. That weekend, Karen tried a new tactic, this time, bypassing me entirely. Early Saturday afternoon, I saw unfamiliar SUVs idling just outside my gate, their hazard lights blinking. Curious, I walked down to the entrance and found two security guards standing with clipboards, explaining that they were here to escort guests for an HOA function on the dock. The fact that they said, on the dock, instead of, in the community, told me exactly whose idea this was. Karen had apparently hired private security to make her invasion look official. The guards weren't aggressive, but they did have that stance people use when they expect compliance. I pointed to the massive, private property, no trespassing, sign bolted to the gate and asked them if their employer had mentioned that minor detail. When they hesitated, I explained that setting foot on my land without permission would be trespassing, subject to immediate police involvement. They glanced at each other, made a quick phone call, and within minutes the SUVs were gone, leaving me with a mental image of Karen somewhere nearby, watching from her car, grinding her teeth at yet another failed attempt. By now, it was almost entertaining to see how she kept raising the stakes. But entertainment can turn into irritation fast when someone refuses to take a hint, and I knew Karen's ego wasn't going to let this go. A few days later, I got a certified letter, not from the HOA, but from a law firm I recognized as one they'd used before. Inside was a cease and desist notice claiming that my actions were impeding community relations and causing reputational harm to the HOA. I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. Karen was the one damaging their image by dragging them into a feud they had no legal standing in. My lawyer had a field day drafting the response, which included a very thorough explanation of property rights, boundary lines, and the fact that my land had been deeded before the HOA's formation. We even attached aerial maps and a copy of the original purchase agreement for good measure. It was a legal knockout punch, and I suspected it wouldn't just shut Karen down, it might finally embarrass the HOA enough to tell her to back off. Still, knowing her, I doubted even that would be the final chapter. Karen was stubborn, and stubborn people often make their biggest mistakes when they feel their control slipping away. It was a Thursday evening when the situation finally took the kind of turn that forces a permanent resolution. I had just returned from town with a few supplies for the dock repair, lumber, nails, and a new weatherproof light, when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The front gate was wide open. My first thought was that maybe the delivery service had accidentally left it that way earlier in the day. But as I got closer, I saw tire marks in the gravel drive, fresh enough that dust still lingered in the air. I parked my truck, grabbed my phone, and followed the tracks toward the lake. Sure enough, I found a crowd of well-dressed people milling around on my dock, sipping drinks, taking photos, and laughing as though they were in some exclusive resort. And at the center of it all, like a self-appointed cruise director, stood Karen. She spotted me before I could say a word, and the smirk that spread across her face was pure provocation. "See," she said, raising her voice for everyone to hear. "This is exactly the kind of hosting spirit our community needs." I didn't bother responding to her little performance. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Karen," I said evenly, "you've got exactly 5 minutes to get every single person off my property. You've broken into my land, trespassed, and hosted an uninvited event without permission. I don't care if you call them VIPs, investors, or the royal family, if they're here under your invitation, they're leaving." She laughed like it was all a big misunderstanding, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be dramatic. The gate code was in the community newsletter, anyone could have come in. Besides, this is for the good of the neighborhood." That was when my patience snapped. "Karen," I said, my voice dropping to the kind of tone I reserve for when someone's about to regret their life choices, "the only way you could have gotten my gate code is if you stole it or had someone give it to you without my consent. Both are criminal acts, and since you've now invited 30 people to trespass, I'm calling the sheriff." That last part seemed to hit her, but rather than backing down, she doubled down in the most Karen way possible, by stepping toward me, planting herself between me and the dock, and saying, "You wouldn't dare." I smiled, pressed the call button on my phone, and put it on speaker. Within seconds, the county dispatcher's voice came through. "Sheriff's office, what's your emergency?" I explained the situation calmly, detailing that a large group had entered my property without permission and that the gate code had been compromised. The dispatcher told me deputies were already nearby and would be there in under 10 minutes. Karen's smirk faltered, but she still tried to salvage control, turning to her guests and saying, "Don't worry, everyone, this is just a misunderstanding. He won't actually throw a fit in front of law enforcement." Unfortunately for her, she had no idea who exactly was on duty that night. When the sheriff's SUV pulled up, the deputy who stepped out wasn't just some random officer, it was Deputy Monroe, a longtime friend of mine who'd spent more than one summer fishing off my dock. The moment he saw me, he gave a casual nod before turning his attention to Karen. "Ma'am, we've had a report of trespassing. Everyone here needs to leave immediately." Karen launched into one of her infamous tirades, painting herself as the victim, claiming the HOA had every right to host events on shared property, and accusing me of hoarding resources. Monroe let her talk for maybe 30 seconds before cutting her off. "Ma'am, I'm looking at county property records right now. This dock and everything attached to it are privately owned by him," he said, pointing at me. "You and your guests are trespassing, and if you don't clear out right now, we'll start issuing citations." That's when one of the guests muttered, "I told you this was a bad idea," and began heading for the parking area. Within minutes, the dock was empty except for Karen, who stood there seething as if sheer indignation could undo reality. "You haven't heard the last of this," she snapped. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You're right, Karen, you're going to hear it from a judge next." The morning after the dock incident, I was already at my attorney's office with the video evidence queued up. Every second was pure gold for a trespassing case: Karen's smug entrance, the crowd on my dock, her admitting the gate code came from a community newsletter, and her refusal to leave until law enforcement arrived. My attorney didn't waste any time filing for a restraining order and preparing civil charges for trespass, unlawful entry, and property code violations. He also suggested we pursue damages for the security breach and the cleanup costs, because, as I later discovered, her little VIP mixer left behind broken glass near the shoreline, trampled flower beds, and an overturned patio chair floating in the lake. This wasn't just a matter of principle anymore, it was about making sure Karen understood there was a real price for crossing that line. We submitted everything to the county clerk that same day, and by Friday afternoon, Karen was served at her front door. I would have paid good money to see the look on her face when she read the words, "Plaintiff, my name," at the top of the packet. The court date was set for 3 weeks later, but in the meantime, the ripple effect of the incident began to hit Karen harder than I expected. First, the HOA board sent out a formal notice to all residents clarifying property boundaries, explicitly stating that my land and dock were private and not subject to HOA events. It was a thinly veiled attempt to distance themselves from her stunt, but it was also a public admission that she had no authority. Word spread fast, and before long, I started hearing from neighbors who were fed up with Karen's antics too. Apparently, my situation wasn't unique. She had a long history of bending community guidelines to suit her personal agenda, from blocking construction permits for people she didn't like to reserving community facilities without official approval. One neighbor even sent me a screenshot of the HOA's internal group chat where another board member wrote, "Karen's on her own for this one. We're not covering her legal fees." That told me everything I needed to know. Her allies were evaporating. When the day of the hearing finally arrived, Karen showed up in a beige power suit and oversized sunglasses, looking like she was trying to project confidence. It didn't last long. My attorney methodically presented the footage, property records, and the sheriff's report. Every time Karen tried to interject, the judge cut her off with a sharp, "You'll have your turn, ma'am." When it was finally her turn, her defense boiled down to claiming she believed the property was communal and that she was acting in the best interest of the neighborhood. The judge wasn't buying it. "Believing something doesn't make it legally true," he said flatly, before ruling in my favor on all counts. Karen was ordered to pay damages, cover my legal costs, and refrain from entering my property for a minimum of 2 years under penalty of arrest. The moment the gavel came down, the color drained from her face. Meanwhile, I walked out of that courtroom with the quiet satisfaction of knowing the law had settled what common sense should have months ago. The aftermath was almost better than the verdict itself. Karen's reputation in the neighborhood took a nosedive, her so-called VIP connections stopped showing up, the HOA quietly removed her from the events committee, and she was notably absent from public gatherings for months. As for me, I reinforced the gate with a new security system and a camera setup that alerts me instantly if anyone so much as slows down in front of the entrance. Every once in a while, I'll catch sight of Karen driving by, sunglasses on, pretending not to look my way. But I know she sees the "private property, no HOA access" sign I had custom made and bolted to the gate after the trial. It's a constant reminder that for all her posturing and maneuvering, she's still just a neighbor with no power here, and I'm the one who controls the dock, the property, and the final say. In the end, Karen's greatest mistake wasn't trespassing, it was underestimating just how stubborn I could be when someone tries to treat my home like their playground.